After the chaos ends, there is silence, not peace, not serenity, but a void that hums with the residue of everything that once was. The empath stands amid the psychic ruins, the shards of love bombs and betrayals glittering like broken mirrors at their feet. Each fragment reflects a version of themselves they once offered to be loved. Now stripped of illusion, they begin to see that the narcissist was never the real enemy, only a reflection of their disowned shadow. This is the final act of the drama, when the performance collapses, and all that remains is the watcher behind the mask. Jung called this descent the confrontation with the unconscious, the soul initiation through darkness. The silence is excruciating because it asks the empath to look inward, to find the predator and the victim within the same heartbeat. The storm outside has ended, but the alchemy begins within. This is where the soul burns, purifies, and remembers itself. The silence is not emptiness, it is sacred ground, the threshold of transformation. Comment below, I am ready to face my own shadow, and let the descent begin. Number 2, the mirror of the predator. The empath awakening begins with horror, the realization that what they loved was not love, but a reflection of their hunger to be seen. The narcissist, the master of mirrors, sensed that hunger and shaped themselves into the perfect illusion. They became the archetype of desire, radiant, magnetic, godlike. But what they needed was reveal the empath unhealed dependency, the need to be chosen to feel whole. And when the mask finally slips, the empath sees not only the manipulator, but the mirror of their own unconscious longing. Jung warned that everything we reject in ourselves returns wear the face of another. The narcissist was that face. The mirror of the predator is brutal because it doesn't lie. It shows you the part of you that wanted power, that fed on validation, that craved intensity so deeply it mistook control for connection. To heal, the empath must stand before that mirror without flinching, to admit that within the victim lives the same shadow that seduced them. That truth doesn't destroy you, it liberates you, because only by recognizing the predator within can you stop attract it outside. This is not about blame, it's about wholeness. It's about reclaiming the exiled energy that was projected onto the narcissist, the assertive, the commanding, the self-loving parts buried under guilt and compliance. The empath becomes empowered when they integrate what they once feared. They stop needing to be saved because they've met the part of themselves that doesn't beg, it claims. The mirror is no longer a weapon, it becomes an altar. Look into it now. See the one who survived, see the one who learned, see the one who finally sees. Comment below. I am the mirror and the flame. Number 3, the alchemy of the wound. Pain is the crucible. It is the fire that melts the false gold of the ego and refines the raw metal of the soul. Every empath who has walked through narcissistic abuse has been tempered in that fire. Not then punishment, but the initiation. The wound is not a curse. It is the philosopher's stone, the secret doorway through which consciousness evolves. When Jung spoke of individuation, he meant precisely this. To become whole, one must descend into the wound and discover its hidden alchemy. The empath pain becomes sacred the moment it is faced without fear, without denial, without the desperate need to escape. It in this stillness that transformation begins, when tears turn to symbols, when anguish becomes instruction. The narcissist may have been the architect of the breaking, but the empath becomes the architect of rebirth. Through the wound, they meet the archetype of the healer, not at a fantasy of fixing others, but at a revelation of the power to transmute their own suffering into wisdom. Each flash of memory, each ghost of humiliation, each fragment of heartbreak becomes raw material, lead turning to gold. That's why the ancient mystics said suffering purifies the soul, because it strips away everything false until only truth remains. The empath, reborn through shadow work, learns that pain never truly leaves, it transforms. It becomes light with memory, strength with depth, softness with boundaries. The alchemy of the wound is not about forgetting what happened, it's about becoming the version of yourself that could exist, because it happened. The empath stops asking, why me, and begins to whisper, now I see. The once fractured self becomes the philosopher, the artist, the healer, the mystic, the one who knows darkness not their enemy, but the forge of divine intelligence. Comment below. My wound is my awakening. Number 4, the death of the rescuer. Every empath is born with a sacred impulse, the instinct to heal, to soothe, to restore balance where others bring chaos. But after narcissistic abuse, that instinct mutates into a dangerous addiction, the need to save what refuses to be saved. The rescue archetype, once noble, becomes a mask for self-abandonment. In the aftermath of the narcissist, the empath realizes this, that every attempt to fix the other was an unconscious plea to avoid facing the emptiness within. The rescue dies the moment the empath understands that healing another cannot substitute for the work of integrating one's own brokenness. Jung said, one does not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious. The empath must let the savior archetype burn in that darkness, to see that what they called compassion was often fear, fear of rejection, fear of insignificance, fear of stillness. There is the death of innocence, but it is also the birth of sovereignty. For the first time, the empath learns to witness suffering without absorbing it, to love without merging, to help without disappearing. The death of the rescuer is not cruelty, yet clarity. If the moment the empath stops mistaking martyrdom for virtue, they stop calling exhaustion empathy. They stop believing that boundaries are selfish. The rescuer dies, and in that funeral rises the archetype of the sovereign, calm, discerning, unshakable. This self no longer kneels for chaos, sits in silence and watches the storm pass untouched. The empath no longer offers their light to those who worship darkness. They understand that sometimes the most compassionate act is to walk away and let karma teach what love did not. The rescuer death is liberation, the shedding of spiritual codependency disguised as virtue. It is the awakening of discernment, the ability to say, your pain is yours to carry, my presence is mine to protect. In this death, the empath is reborn, a guardian of their own energy, a sovereign soul who no longer bleeds for approval but radiates from wholeness. Comment below, my empathy now serves my sovereignty. Number 5. The shadow crown. When the rescuer dies, something ancient stirs within the ashes, the archetype of the ruler, the sovereign of the inner kingdom. This is the moment when the empath, once fragile from endless giving, begins to reclaim the throne of their psyche. The crown they wear now is not gold. It is forged from shadow, from humiliation, betrayal, and nights spent questioning their worth. This crown carries weight. It is the burden of consciousness itself. To wear it is to see both light and darkness without flinching. To recognize that goodness without boundaries becomes weakness, and power without empathy becomes tyranny. The empath learns to balance these poles as the alchemist balances fire and water. Jung would call this the integration of opposites, the uniting of the anima and animas, the meeting of hen and hell within one consciousness. The shadow crown represents mastery over projection. The empath no longer sees devils or saviors in others, they see reflections. Every relationship becomes a mirror in which they observe their own evolution. The narcissist voice fades, replaced by the whisper of inner authority. The self, the central archetype that Jung described as the organizing force of the psyche. This self does not seek validation, it radiates sense. It governs not through domination but through unzang. It knows that true power lies in stillness, not control. The empath begins to move differently now, slower, deliberate, aware of the energy behind each seed and gesture. They no longer chase connection, they attract resonance. They no longer need to prove purity, they embody authenticity. The shadow crown teaches them that integration is not perfection, is wholeness, the ability to hold contradictions without collapse. In dreams, it may appear being light emerging from a cave, or a serpent coiling under chalice, symbols of wisdom reclaimed from darkness. The empath, now sovereign, stops fearing the shadow and begins to use it as guidance, ease, creative fuel, and sacred fire. Their boundaries become invisible temples. Their silence becomes law. The world no longer dictates their worth. They do. And the paradox is this: by accepting their own darkness, they become untouchable by those who once fed on their light. The crown is heavy, yes, but it fits perfectly. Comment below. I wear my shadow like a crown. Number 6. The return to the underworld. Every transformation circles back to where it began. After the empath claims the shadow crown, life retests its weight. The world does not celebrate those who reclaim their power, it provokes them. The narcissist may vanish, but the archetype returns to others, lovers, family, strangers, each carrying the scent of the same-old lesson. This is the return to the underworld, the second descent. Jung said that what remains unconscious will continue to appear the fate. The empath now understands this. They see the pattern, not the punishment, but the initiation, a spiral staircase descending into deeper layers of awareness. To walk it is to confront the parts of the self still hiding in shadow, the remnants of guilt, the echoes of shame, the craving to be understood by those incapable of understanding. In myth, every hero must revisit the underworld, not to suffer again, but to retrieve the wisdom left behind. Persephone returns not to the victim, but to the queen who knows both realms. So does the healed empath. They descend consciously this time, carrying light instead of seeking it. The narcissistic dynamic becomes symbolic, no longer a personal tragedy, but a myth of awakening. Each encounter with manipulation, deceit, or projection becomes an opportunity to practice discernment, to test the strength of the crown. The empath observes rather than absorbs, responding instead of reacting. Their empathy is no longer naive, it is tempered by wisdom. They know how to read energy, how to sense motive beneath charm, how to remain grounded amid emotional chaos. The underworld no longer terrifies them because they've learned to breathe its air. They know that darkness is not evil, it is information. The return to the underworld is a reclaiming of psychic power, a reunion with the unconscious that once ruled them from the shadows. The empath emerges not drained, but radiant with knowledge of both realms, the light of consciousness and the dark of instinct. They understand now that the journey was never about escaping pain, but about mastering it. To rise, one must first return, not to prey, but to presence itself. The circle closes, but the soul expands. Thumb it below. I descend with light in my hands. Number 7. The rebirth of the self. Rebirth is never gentle. It arrives not at a sunrise, but at a wildfire that burns through everything false. For the empath, this rebirth marks the end of identity built on suffering. The old self, the pleaser, the rescuer, the dreamer of impossible redemption crumbles into dust. What rises is not a replacement, but a remembering. The original self, unconditioned, untamed, luminous in its own authenticity. Jung said that to be reborn is to allow the old persona to die, for no one can reach heaven by clinging to masks made for survival. The empath has worn many saint, healer, lover, victim, but in this new dawn, every mask feels like a chain. The rebirth of the self begins in the body, where truth first trembles. Breath by breath, the empath learns to inhabit their own energy without apology. They speak with precision, love with discernment, and walk with the grounded power of someone who has seen the abyss and lived to name it. The shadow they once feared now stands beside them, no longer an enemy but a companion, a dark twin whispering truth in moments of doubt. Together they form the whole human being. Jung envisioned one who contains both the saint and the sinner, the healer and the destroyer, the light and the night. In dreams, this transformation might appear a figure stepping out of fire or a serpent shedding its final skin. It's not about perfection, but integration. The empath learns to forgive themselves for the ways they abandoned their own intuition, for the times they stayed silent, for the love they gave too freely. Forgiveness becomes the final key, unlocking the prison built by self-blame. In this stage, compassion turns inward, and for the first time, it feels like power. The empath no longer seeks validation in reflection, but finds it in resonance with the inner self, the eternal observing consciousness that has never been broken, only obscured. From this space they begin to create again, not from pain but from presence. Their words, their art, their silence all carry gravity. They no longer chase meaning, they embody it. The rebirth of the self is quiet yet unstoppable, a dawn creeping over ruins. It is the realization that the soul never needed saving, it needed see. The empath now move through life like a lucid dreamer, awake in both worlds, unbound by illusion, anchored in the sacred rhythm of their own being. They have died and returned and themselves. Comment below, I have been reborn through my shadow. Number 8. The integration of the archetypes. True mastery begins when the empath realizes that healing was never about returning to who they were, but becoming who they were meant to be. Integration is the final alchemy, the union of opposites within the psyche. Jung taught that every human being contains an entire pantheon of archetypes: the lover, the warrior, the magician, the sovereign, the child, the sage, and yes, even the shadow. Each one speaks a different language, but all are fragments of one divine self waiting to be harmonized. The empath, now reborn, begins this inner council. The lover teaches compassion without possession. The warrior teaches strength without cruelty. The magician whispers transformation through awareness, turning pain into wisdom, fear into vision. And the shadow, that once feared abyss, now sits beside them, an honored guest, reminding them that light without darkness is blindness, not clarity. Integration is not a theme act, it is a lifelong dialogue. It is the empath's daily ritual of acknowledging all inner voices without letting any one of them rule. They no longer exile their anger, repress their desire, or shame their ambition. They learn to let each archetype express itself in balance, not a chaos, but a symphony of consciousness. In this harmony, the empath discovers a new kind of power, the power of choice. no longer a slave to emotional extremes. They become the observer and the orchestrator of their psychic landscape. When the world provokes them, they respond not from wound, but from wisdom. When manipulation reappears, they recognize it instantly, not with bitterness, but with clarity. Every test becomes a mirror, every mirror a lesson, every lesson another thread in the tapestry of wholeness. Jung believed that individuation, the process of becoming whole, was the purpose of life itself. The empath now understands that the narcissist, the pain, the descent into shadow, all were catalysts for this awakening. Without darkness, there is no depth. Without conflict, no clarity. The empath's soul becomes a temple. Their archetype kneels in unity. From this inner equilibrium, they radiate an energy that cannot be manipulated, drained, or refined by others. It is the vibration of authenticity, the frequency of the self-realized. Integration is not the end of the journey. It is the beginning of conscious creation, the moment the empath steps beyond survival and begins to shape reality with intention, awareness, and grace. Comment below, all my archetypes bow to myself. Number 9. The light beyond the shadow. There comes a moment in every seeker path when the darkness once feared and studied begins to shimmer with an unexpected beauty. The empath, having walked through the labyrinth of shadow work, begins to notice that the same darkness that once devoured them now glows faintly from within. This is the paradox Jung hinted at, that the deeper one descends into the unconscious, the closer one moves to the divine. Light and shadow are not enemies, they are dance partners in the choreography of awakening. The empath realizes that enlightenment is not about transcending the dark, but seeing through it, recognizing that the pain and peace arise from the same source, consciousness itself. The narcissist, once perceived as the villain of the story, now becomes a symbol, an archetype of unconsciousness that forced the empath to awaken. What once felt like torment now feels like initiation. What once shattered them now serves sacred architecture for the new being they've become. In this stage, the empath begins to embody equanimity. Their emotions no longer control them, they move like tides that the moon of awareness. They have learned the rare art of inner stillness, a serenity that doesn't deny chaos, but observes with quiet authority. This is not spiritual bypassing, it is spiritual embodiment. The empath knows the language of the abyss and the grammar of the stars. They walk between worlds, grounded yet infinite. Jung called this state the realization of the self, the alignment of the ego with the totality of being. It feels that clarity so pure hums beneath the skin. The empath no longer seeks revenge, closure, or unsane from those who wounded them. They see that every soul is acting out its own unconscious myth, and that compassion without attachment is the highest form of strength. The light beyond the shadow is not blinding, it's subtle, patient, wise. It teaches the paradox that surrender is power, that silence is speech, that endings are beginnings written in reverse. The empath now understands that the entire journey, the love, the betrayal, the fall, the resurrection, was the psyche way of guiding them toward this moment of wholeness. They no longer worship light or fear darkness. They become both a living equilibrium, a bridge between heaven and hell, between soul and matter. Their presence alone begins to shift others, not by preaching but by embodying. They have become the calm in other people's storms, not by trying to rescue but simply by being what they are, light aware of its shadow, shadow aware of its light. This is transcendence without escape, holiness without pretense. It is life lived consciously, every heartbeat a meditation, a breath an act of creation. The empath stands now not a victim or survivor, but a witness, luminous, grounded, free. Comment below, I am the light that remembers the dark. Number 10. The final stage, the sacred balance. This is that the journey comes full circle, not at an ending, but an eternal rhythm that beats quietly beneath every conscious breath. The empath, once shattered by love distortion and seduced by illusion, now stands in sacred balance. They have touched both heaven and hell within themselves and returned with the knowing that they are both. The final stage is not victory, it is not enlightenment, it escape. It is equilibrium, a profound and living harmony between the light and the dark, the heart and the will, the human and the divine. Jung wrote that wholeness is not achieved by cutting off the shadow, but by embracing it. And in a final alchemical union, the empath no longer fears their shadow. They wear a part of their being, an invisible cloak woven from wisdom, clarity, and self-respect. They have become the embodiment of what Jung called the self, that central archetype of totality, where the opposites no longer battle for dominance but dissolve into communion. In this sacred balance, life feels different. The empath no longer lives reactively, pulled by the gravity of others' wounds. They move with intention, with awareness, with a sense of quiet command. Their empathy is transformed from emotional absorption into spiritual perception. They sense without drowning, they feel without fracturing. They have become the observer within the storm, a consciousness that sees without clinging, that loves without losing itself. Where once they sought to be chosen, now they simply choose. They no longer need validation to confirm their worth, because their worth has become intrinsic, unshakable, rooted in being rather than approval. Their compassion is sharper now, edged with discernment. They can hold space for another pain without mistaking it for their own. This is not coldness, it is clarity, the divine neutrality of someone who has walked through fire and understood its purpose. The narcissist, once the architect of their collapse, becomes irrelevant in this final stage, not forgiven out of naivety, but dissolved by unding. The empath sees that the narcissist's cruelty was never personal. It was the unconscious acting out its starvation for selfhood. They no longer carry resentment, because resentment belongs to those who still see themselves as powerless. Power in this new form is not about dominance. It is about self-governance, the ability to remain whole in a fragmented world. The empath has mastered the art of internal sovereignty. They have learned that their energy is sacred currency, and they spend it with awareness. They've become their own sanctuary, their own healer, their own mirror. In this stage, the archetypes within the psyche stand aligned. The warrior guards the boundaries. The lover opens the heart. The magician transforms experience into art. The sovereign governs it with wisdom. Even the shadow kneels, not in submission, but in reverence. The empath becomes an integrated ecosystem, light and dark in conversation, chaos and order dancing as one. This is the sacred balance, the sole ultimate realization that everything belongs. The pain was a teacher. The love was an illusion and a truth. The loss was liberation disguised the destruction. Every scar is a sigil of initiation, every silence a cathedral of strength. Now the empath walks through life differently. They do not chase light, they radiate it. They do not seek peace, they are peace. They no longer look for meaning in us, as they've become the meaning itself, living, breathing awareness wrapped in human form. Their energy no longer leaks through the wounds of need, it flows through the open channels of purpose. When they speak, their words carry gravity. When they leave, it is choice, not compulsion. When they walk away, it is grace, not fear. This is the evolution of empathy into consciousness. The soul no longer fractured by polarity, but centered in paradox. And now the empath understands the deepest truth, that the final stage was never about defeating darkness, but about becoming its keeper, to stand between worlds, to embody the middle path, the razor edge where light meets shadow, is to live the self fully realized. Jung called this the conjunctio, the sacred marriage of opposites. It is not an ending, but an eternal dance, the heartbeat of creation itself pulsing within the human psyche. The empath has become both student and sage, both moon and sun, both chaos and calm. They are no longer defined by what they've survived, but by what they've integrated. The mirror no longer reflects wounds, it reflects wholeness. So as the journey closes, listen carefully. The silence has returned, not the empty silence of the beginning, but the sacred silence of understanding. The storm has become the sky. The wound has become the window. The empath, now whole, gazes at their reflection and whispers, "Not I survived, but I have become." Comment below. I am the balance between shadow and light. And if these words resonated, if they stirred something ancient within you, remember to subscribe and turn on notifications, because your awakening has only just begun. The descent is over. The integration begins now. Welcome home, seeker.